it, but I got there in a year where it had torrential rains for a couple of weeks before, and so you've got one just giant gush coming over, and I've never seen an actual other photo of Blackwater Falls. It's not because of my talent, I just got lucky with the weather. Okay, so basically, we see the world in color. I guess maybe at one point in, some of the lower life forms see it in, black and white, but we see it in color. And in the digital era, which is like, since, practically speaking, since the late 90s, our cameras all record in color. Back when I started in photography, it was a choice. You shot black and white film or you shot color film. And I have many negatives of failed black and white and color photos. I was equally bad in those days. But now you get color by default. And yet, black and white remains a valid way to present things, and we'll talk about why you might want to use it instead of color. We'll then take a look at an overview of Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop and Nick Silver effects for processing black and white images. And then we'll go through some specific examples of processing color, and then some samples of different kinds of photos. Okay, you can go out to the internet and ask the question, when should I shoot black and white? And I've highlighted some of the answers, and they match with what I know and understand in practice. Light and shadows, which is the stuff that all photography is based on. If they're the principal issue in a scene, that's one instance. With line form and texture are key components of the composition. It's another reason you might want to shoot black and white. Just from an artistic point of view, when a monochrome rendering would just better convey what you see. And finally, when colors distract from any of the above. However, you can't expect it to rescue a bad photo. And the last time I said this, immediately after somebody posted a photo that they said, this was a bad photo and I rescued it. It was like the day after my presentation. So I thought, well, there's the exception right there. But I looked at the photo, I didn't think it was that bad to begin with, but okay. If you can rescue it with black and white, go for it. Photographic issues. The photo on the right has got to be the most sickly color I've ever seen. And maybe some of you like it, and I shouldn't say that, but to me, that blue and that kind of pale tan of the concrete just didn't do anything for me. The real strength of this shadow, of this photo, was the shadow of the bike. And so that's what you have on the left side is the bike moved over to color, and I did some things to emphasize the texture as well as the shapes.
Hey, Bill?
Yeah.
Did you rescue that photo?
Tough crowd here.
I can tell this is going to be a long evening. Thank goodness we have to be out of here at a destined time. Why, yes, Jerry. Okay. This is the Flagler Memorial Church. It's an architectural abstract that I took. And on the right, basically, if you look at these two, the color really isn't doing much for this thing. In fact, the little, let's see if I can make this work. The little arch up here, the color is just popping enough that it kind of distracts you, and these things are a little bit more prominent maybe than they need to be because of the color. So I converted it to black and white, and you can see, and this is going to be one of the examples I'll show you how I processed it. But in general, the black and white is bringing out the shapes, the forms, and the texture without distracting from anything. This one's about mood. This is, you know, your artistic vision. If you like the photo on the right, the only thing I see there is maybe the red eye. You could make a case for that is a part of the vulture that is interesting in color, but the rest really wasn't. And I always think of these as more stark, you know, let's face it, they feast on dead things. So I wasn't trying to make them look pretty. Here's one that worked in both. Both these pictures were awarded something in a competition. If you look at them side by side, most people prefer the color, but there's a case for black and white when you're not viewing them side by side. And since I don't ever show them that way, I've used them both ways and to good advantage. Oops, wrong way. And here's the case for black and white, just doesn't quite get it here. I mean, it's not a terrible photo, but compared to the color, it's kind of lifeless. Color is really what made this, and part of it is because it's dependent on color contrast, right? There's two kinds of contrast. You've got contrast of tones, which in black and white is the difference between the different tones, whereas the other one has got color contrast. There's a difference between those red clouds and the blue sky behind it, and that's part of the success of this image. That's what gives it its pop, as well as being a nice, you know, nice set of complementary colors. Okay. So having said that, what are the tools and the workflow? I'm not going to talk about cameras or any of those kind of tools because it's the same as it is for color photography. You use your camera, you produce a color original, and then you want to convert to black and white. So I can't say, oh, you need this kind of camera, this kind of lens. That doesn't change. But in post-processing, things change a little bit. Some of the tools are the same, but you use them in a different way. So the first one of those is Lightroom. Lightroom will give you all of your basic adjustments for exposure, you know, highlights, shadow, sharpening, noise reduction. Nowadays, people are tending to do noise reduction outside of Lightroom, or they're using the Lightroom tool, but it's still basically there. Transformation adjustments, that's where you're trying to make lines stand up straight, right? Okay. For some photos, this may be enough. If you're using the knit tools, then you don't want to touch clarity, haze, or texture. And you want to try to make sure that the highlights don't click. We'll talk about what that means in a second. If you aren't using knit tools, then those three things that I just mentioned, clarity, dehaze, and texture, are very important tools to you, because those are things that black and white thrives on. And so if you're going to try to do it within Lightroom, and many people do, you need to use those tools and season to taste, so to speak. EXO Mark is an add-on. It comes from a company called DxO, and it's a fully featured tool set for monochrome conversion. And a lot of people who do a lot of black and white use it. What I find, people have said, oh, you can do the same thing in Lightroom. Well, the example I would give you is that I was somewhere with a laptop that didn't have the DxO tools. I said, let me give this a try. So I spent about 2 hours editing a photo, and it came out pretty nicely. And then I came home and I said, let me try this now in Nick. And I was done in 15 minutes, and the result was better. Okay, so there's that element of it. Especially important are the presets, because they've got a number of presets you can use to see the overall look and then tweak from there. And that, I think, is useful. And the finishing tool, they have some finishing tools, but I tend not to use those because I usually want to tweak things in Lightroom or Photoshop after I come back, so I don't do the borders and things like that in Nick most of the time. Or if I do the finishing work and then I go back to Nick and use the borders on a copy. And finally, Photoshop is useful for the things that it has strengths. It's got layers and masks and other tools that aren't in Lightroom. And Lightroom and Photoshop are very potent pairing. So let's just go through some workflow examples and you'll see how this thing gets done. So here we've got the file of the church. It's imported into Lightroom. The shapes are good, strong lines, all the things, good texture. That's not very prominent in the color version. So the color kind of just gets in the way a little bit. So the first thing we do is tweak the levels in Lightroom. And so I'll yell from here. So we're going to tweak these levels, and what I did really, it was easy. I just clicked the auto, right, and let Lightroom do its thing, and then I pulled the black and whites back to 0 so that I wouldn't have clipping. I wouldn't have empty black shadows or empty white highlights, because I know I'm going to pick up a little contrast as I go through. And that just is a fact of life once you start to manipulate and increase things like texture or whatever. It may also increase contrast. So that's what you're seeing here. So you tell it, oops, wrong way. You tell it you want to go into editing silver effects. And silver effects is a plug-in to Lightroom, so you don't have to leave Lightroom. Everybody know what I mean by a plug-in? Okay. You get a pop-up window. You mark the circle, edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments because Nick does not speak raw files or PSD, which is the Lightroom copy. So you're going to make a copy, you tell it you want a TIFF, and then everything else, the copy file options, should be okay. And you click Edit. And now you're in the Nick tools. Things have changed a little bit. If you bought a more recent copy, there's some slight changes, but I'll walk you through what's going on here. So on the left, you got all your presets. And now you have less of them because they got more stuff over here and more stuff on the top. On the right, you have all of your settings. So brightness, contrast, structure, which is what I was talking about. And then you've got some color filters, useful if you know the way black and white film work. The color filters, yellow blocks out blue, so you darken skies, things like that. So the frequently used presets are the ones that I use. Are structure, one for high and low key. I find those handy. Sometimes contrast. There's some like high contrast ones, but that's just a good starting point. So then you can then tweak just like you would in Lightroom if you used a preset there.
What numbers are those, Bill?
I do not know the numbers.
Okay.
I know you, and that's interesting that you do those by the numbers, but I don't. I remember the names. But my most used ones are the two structure ones, high structure harsh and high structure smooth, which is kind of a misnomer. You gotta watch out with the smooth one because it can halo stuff and do things like that. So it comes in handy once in a while. So on the right, you got brightness, contrast, and structure, and once you hit the preset, it'll change those sliders. And so then the way you adjust things is through the sliders that are on the right. And then on the bottom right is where you've got your filters, but you've got control points, so you can locally do things in the NIC tools. In other words, you can put a circle over a particular area that you might want to brighten, darken, add structure, or whatever, and it will just affect that area. And just the tones that you've selected. At the bottom is a histogram. Serves the same function as it does in Lightroom and or Photoshop. And so you can make sure that your highlights and shadows aren't clipping. And there's actually a preset up here somewhere, not a preset, but some tools that say preserve the highlights, preserve the shadows. So that comes in handy to keep you from driving those things off the ends of the histogram. And finally on the bottom is a very important button called Save. If you don't press that, the results may not be what you
Can I
want.
ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you rather?
No, go for it. Go for it.
So, like, once you choose your template or your
Preset,
preset,
template, whatever.
preset,
Yeah.
and then you go to the right-hand side and you start doing some changes. Like, for example, with this particular picture, if you're looking at it, are there things that you generally say, all right, I'm going to go ahead and just do a control on certain parts of it just by looking at it? Do you kind of in your own mind?
Well, for example, after I hit the preset, if this area doesn't come down enough, I'm going to put a control point here,
Okay.
and may have. I don't recall specifically doing that, but that would be one area that I think needs to come down and needs to have some texture. So it would be likely to do that here.
What about the circle? Would you put more contrast on that, or?
Maybe. I don't recall doing that specifically, but one of the first thing that happened was it came down. It's not kind of the center of, as much of the center of attention anymore. So here we go. So here I hit high structure, harsh, and now this stuff comes down. You can see the texture much better here and here. And you have picked up some texture here. I might have burned that down a little bit using a control point, but I don't recall doing that specifically. And so you can see here, highlighted is the structure, the one that you selected. And here's the sliders. This is what it comes out to. So now, if you want, and I didn't really need to manipulate these, but this is the way they set them up, so then you can control it. Like, for example, many times it does 33%, which is a healthy boost to structure, and does an additional 27% in the midtones. I find that sometimes it's necessary to tone that down, and so I will reduce the one on the midtones. Hang on. Okay, go again. I'm afraid I would have to step out here because okay, I'm good there. Got that one done. Oh, I'm going backwards. I want to-
Hey, Bill,
Yeah,
you have controls on that little thing in your hand. Did you-
yeah, but I didn't plug them in
Okay.
because every time I go to use the pointer, then I advance the slide and then it works out real well. Okay, yeah, so you click the save button, and your file goes back to Adobe Lightroom. You come back in Adobe Lightroom with this photo selected. There was no clipping of the black and whites when I came back, so I added just a little bit to give it a full tonal range. Most of my photos, I try to go for a full range, black to white, and a bunch of shades of gray in between. Okay. And that's what I mean by a full tonal range. So this is your finished product. I didn't really have to do anything really didn't have to do any extensive editing or any localized things. Once in a while you get lucky. And so here's the before and after, and you can kind of see the difference, particularly up here, where you've got better texture here. You can see the stuff in the shadows. I hate to report that if you want to go down and do this, they painted the building, so you don't have. Oh yeah, they painted.
No.
So the block is no longer visible, and yeah, been there as naked block for what, 100 years, and
Did they ask your permission?
they did not ask my permission. I would have told them that was a bad idea, but that didn't happen. Okay. Any questions to this point? Okay. So here we have one of the warmer and friendlier creatures of the alligator farm. It is an African buzzard. And it doesn't look happy.
How can you tell?
What's that?
How can you tell?
How can you
There's no
tell?
smile?
Yeah. Any event. Yeah, I don't know what it is about those things, but they just face only a mother could love. Any event. Texture is key for this thing, and the understated, this color is kind of understated here, which is good, but it's not particularly valuable. The other issue here is that much of this creature is in the darkness. His face is very much in the shadows. So we need to kind of bring that out. So in the Lightroom, the first thing I did was move the highlight slider down to -100 to bring down the brightness in the background. And then I moved the shadows to +100 to bring up the shadows on the bird. That's somewhat of a risky maneuver because there are times that if you go to 0 to -100 and +100 on those sliders, you can get some haloing. I got fortunate and that wasn't the case on this image. But particularly if you've got like a real flat area, like a blue sky, then you can get a little bit of haloing with those sliders. So you just have to use them with some discretion. So the next thing we're going to do is go to Photoshop. So the advantage, we're still going to use Nick, but the advantage of going into Photoshop first is it creates a separate layer. So now you can do all sorts of interesting Photoshop things with it. The Nick results will come back in that separate layer, so you'll have the base layer with your original image, and the silver effects in a separate one, and you'll see why that's important in a moment. Not important for all images, but it was for this one. So you click Filter in Photoshop on the main menu, and a Nick collection is also a plug-in to Photoshop, so you go right there. And you select Silver Effects Pro, and the photo will open in the Nick tool. So you get neutral conversion as the default. High structure harsh brings out the detail on the bird. You can see, now you can see the lovely stuff on his neck. You got a much better look at his eye. But at the background. Now it's gotten blotchy, and it's distracting. So you gotta do something to deal with that, but I'm not going to do that in Nick. I'm gonna save it and return to Photoshop. And now we have 2 layers. Right? You've got your original background layer and then a Nick layer. From here, I'm going to then, and you can see this over here I'm going to create what's called a layer mask. And I'm going to create a black layer mask, and that'll make all of the Nick effect go away. Why would you do that? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it all go away and then paint it in on the bird where I want it and leave the background untouched. So that's exactly what you're seeing here. First of all, this is where you put on the layer mask. You click that. To get a black one, to get a white one, you just click it. To get a black one, you control click it, or on the Mac, I believe it's Apple click, but I won't swear to it. You guys will have to read your instruction manual. And then I take the paintbrush and I start painting it in. So notice this is partial, but I've painted in the face and the shadows and all of that stuff. I don't touch the background. By the time I'm finished, I will paint all this jazz in. That's part of the bird, but none of the background. I also don't paint the beak because the beak looks very smooth, and I don't want to reveal any of the little lumps and bumps and things that bird beaks get over the course of a lifetime. So now this is still in Photoshop. I've painted in the whole bird so you can see what I'm going to get, except that the background is still in color. So at this point, you have 2 choices. You can either put in a black and white layer in Photoshop, and that will take care of the problem, or you can take it back to Lightroom and do the black and white there. And I've elected in this particular case to do it back in Lightroom. So I come back to Lightroom, and I just hit the black and white button. Simple as it is. And in this case, I sometimes tweak things when I come back. In this case, I just hit auto, and it did the job. Once again, that doesn't happen all that frequently, because usually I hit auto and then I have to tweak it a little bit, but in this case it worked just fine. So now your end result is you've got the bird with all of his shadow detail, with all of the good stuff brought out, and the background has now stayed kind of unmodeled and has been converted to black and white. What? Oh, yes.
Now that Lightroom has so much masking and
So much what?
Lightroom has improved on masking,
Yeah.
masking the subject. Could you have achieved probably the same thing now just in Lightroom by selecting the bird or you think it's necessary for me?
I don't think you could do that very well. Photoshop is going to do it a lot better, let me put it that way. Because yes, you could select just the bird or tell it to select background. I don't recall, you can pull down the saturation. I don't think that they've got the kind of automated monochrome deal there. And you can play with the curves, so you can try it. In other words, if you don't have Lightroom, if you don't have Photoshop, but if you have Lightroom now, Photoshop comes with it. So it kind of doesn't hurt to learn a few basic Photoshop skills. I'm not an expert, but you could try it. The thing that I find in Lightroom, like for example the remove tool, is not as accurate as the one in Photoshop. from masking, it's kind of 50-50, but I think what you can do as far as painting things in works a little bit better in Photoshop still. Because it's a pixel level edit at that point. Whereas Lightroom is trying to emulate that, and it does a pretty good job now. You're right, there are much better tools.
Bill,
Yeah.
is there ever a time when you choose to keep the eye as natural color?
I have done a two-tone with the eye, and it can work. And I've done some other selective color things. Don't have any examples of those, but I've done other selective color things. And sometimes it works, sometimes it looks artificial. One other thing I did do with this image is I did split toning on it, which is just to say I toned it. I used the sepia preset in Lightroom and then backed it down a little bit because I thought it was a little strong. But I will often do that with natural subjects because it makes, for birds and animals and so on, and I do it by feel. But in this case, I thought it worked because of the original color. Here's your before and after. That, to me, the color on the left is over the top, but that little bit of tint I think helps the one that's in monochrome. And you may disagree. You might just like it in plain black and white. Okay, so I used to bring a box of prints with me to these presentations, and then the last time I was in St. Augustine, somebody said, well, why don't you just put them in the slideshow? And I didn't have a real good answer to that question, so now they're in the slideshow. What I've done in this case, though, is I picked out about 12 photos that I can talk about and that show the breadth of things, at least that I photograph in black and convert to black and white, and also just talk a little bit about processing. So we'll go from there. Okay, this is, we started with Blackwater Falls. This is Whitewater Falls in North Carolina. It is just a subsection of Whitewater Falls because Whitewater Falls is much larger, and I've gotten some decent photos of them. But you go in the fall because you want the waterfall with the fall colors, but sometimes that doesn't work out. You go in the spring, however, usually things are flowing, and if you go to black and white, you don't have to worry about the fact that everything else is green. But this worked out, and the comments that I'll make here just are brief. I tried to hold detail at some level in the shadows, in the darker shadows. Not a lot, not an unrealistic amount, but just enough to make it present. That's probably the most tricky thing I did in processing here. The other thing I will say about shooting waterfalls, whether in black and white or color, you're there, you got the tripod set up, try different shutter speeds. If a lot of people go and they go, all right, I think I need an eighth of a second, click, and then they're on to the next thing. I'm going, how far did you drive to get here? Okay. This is the oldest photograph in this presentation, and it's one of those things where it's set as a color photograph for about, 10 years or something. And I was going through and I said, that might make a good black and white, because the bird is in a shaft of light. I didn't really have to burn down the back very much. You can see just little traces of stuff because I didn't want it to be totally empty. It worked out very well. The bird pops nicely. I didn't go with a tone here. It seemed to be very good just in plain, cold black and white. But, so there's two things here. One, don't be afraid to go back and look for your older photos. And two, of course, wildlife, regardless of the fact that you don't have color, can be very effective. This was an empty office. This may not be everybody's idea of a good time, but I saw the four things that make a photo good. We had light, we had lines, we had shadows, and we had light. Anybody notice that I mentioned light twice? It's real important, right? What we do is painting with light. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it, so I decided to include it in there. But it's the photography of the everyday. You look around and you find things that are more interesting than, than other people might see. And everybody's going to see things differently. I just happen to see these kinds of things with light and lines frequently, or more frequently than I see other kinds of
Bill, were you
subjects.
standing indoors or outdoors? Or
That's outdoors. That's, to tell you what it actually is, the top half is a window with blinds. The bottom half is a desk that had a glass top on it, reflecting the windows with blinds and, on both sides. And I just found the converging lines very interesting. Here is a photo that I call Standing Tall. We got lucky here. Those of you who know Don Dimer, I was on his boat with a few other folks who are here tonight. And this thing was in dry dock, and we got up relatively close to it without getting shot, because it's an empty ship. And got some good pictures of it. And the thing that I learned from this about boats is that if you can get down low, especially if their hull is out of the water, you can get some dynamite pictures. I got, not present tonight, but I got a good picture of a shrimp boat. I was amazed at how big those things are. But it had beached itself in Ormond Beach, and now you can see the entirety of the hull. And when a person stood next to it, I'm like, this thing's a monster. And yet, if you just look at them in Mayport, you don't think they're that big. So, yeah, so probably the big thing on this one was getting a low point of view. And again, the color of the ship was gray. The only thing that had much color here was the sky, and that was a bit distracting. So I went to black and white, and it went away. The distraction, anyway. Ship wasn't going anywhere. Interesting note, the next time we passed it by, they had put a cover over the front. They had hung a big drape up there. I guess they didn't like the fact that we came by and photographed it. This I call Southern Gentleman. This was taken at Olustee. Here the choice of sepia was obvious. It's, a Civil War battle type situation there, and all those photos had a brown tint to them, because that's what they looked like. There was no other choice back in the 1860s or so. Probably noteworthy is I had to bring up the guy's hat face under the shadows and bring up his fingers and the cigar and all of that to get some detail there. Because useful to hold on to.
Bill, do you ever do HDR exposures from black and white?
What's that?
Do you ever do HDR exposures from black and white?
Oh yeah, all the time. I don't think I probably didn't here, but I did do a lot of dodging on the subject. The other thing, I brought it into Nick as after I did all of the adjustments, got it to look the way I wanted, but I wanted to, because it was that era, I added this border to give you that singed edge look. Nighttime architecture, yes, there's a lot of beauty in the colored lights, but you can get a good black and white at night.
Where were you standing?
Yeah, where were you standing?
Where was I standing? I was going to say, this was taken on one of our excursions where where Nancy arranged to get us on top of the Hyatt. Yeah, the Hyatt Hotel. And so I got this. I definitely wouldn't have got it from the ground. Thank you, Nancy. Anybody recognize this environment? Yeah, again, one person does. Who also shot these bottles. This is Stetson Kennedy's house that we did an outing to. And this was the best photo I got that day. But, once again, it's a different genre, still life. I decided that it was better in black and white than color. And what drives this one is the textures here on the bottle. and then you've got kind of it's a grouping of three, but mostly it's the texture, and then the background was kind of a frosted glass, and it's kind of, the focus is kind of soft there, so it kind of falls out, so these things kind of pop against the background. So,
Question, Bill. Your decision to make an image monochrome or color, is that decision mostly made in the field when you see it, or is it mostly made once you're back home?
that is a very good question. A lot of, and I'll divide this way, a lot of people who do monochrome type work a lot, they see it up front and that's, that's what they do. And then there are those who just, kind of, they pre-visualize it, and there are some that post-visualize it. They're working on it in Photoshop or Lightroom, and they go, yeah, this might make a good monochrome. I actually do both. There are some things that I recognize when I click the shutter, I'm going, that's monochrome. There are others that I'm looking at it and I go, okay, yeah, let's give it a try in monochrome. And and it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't.
Bill, do you always have your camera set to color though?
Yeah, I don't, because I'm shooting in RAW, the RAW image is always in color anyway. So if you set it to black and white, you'll see that on the JPEG. I don't tend to do that. Although I'll talk briefly about infrared. That's the one place for a while I was shooting JPEGs as well as RAWs. High contrast. Having said that, I like a tone, black and white and a whole bunch of shades of gray. This one doesn't have that. There are some subjects that just pop in high contrast. Again, this may not be to everybody's taste, but this is kind of an everyday scene, and I looked at it and I thought, wow, that's interesting. Most of the motion is going this way, but that one arrow on the back kind of sets up contrasting motion going the other way. And when I was processing it, I thought, oh no, so I used that high contrast preset in Nick, and practically didn't have to touch anything else. There was some like white spots where the black paint had worn through here, and I kind of spotted those out. But other than that, it was a pretty simple process. Where am I at time-wise? I got, what, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, gonna have to pick up the pace a bit. Well, I don't have that much left, actually. Here's what I call Cathedral Bridge. This is actually the Acosta Bridge. And this one I entered in the creative category because, in fact, the photo was really that much. And I did what's called mirroring in Photoshop and flipped it over. And I don't do a lot of that, but I looked at this image, and the half of it I saw, I said, this thing needs to be symmetrical. So I made it symmetrical, converted it to black and white. And for whatever reason, this is a case where I can't tell you why I did brown tint other than it seemed to fit the original color of the cement, but also because it gave that more of a cathedral feel. A couple of things worth quickly pointing out here is that when you do a mirror, it can look too much like a mirror. So it's good to change some things. So like down here, this blotchy thing I took off of that side. This little patch of light that's here I took off of this side. Some of the lines that are in this block, I took them off on one side or the other to make it less of a mirror type thing. And I thought, oh, there's no way that, I stuck it into creative back when I was entering the competitions for F3C, and I thought, they're not going to like this. Mirror is just too simple to do. And some of them I liked it just fine.
Now, what bridge is that again, Bill?
That's the Acosta.
It is Acosta.
And I could only get one side under the bridge where I was standing at that particular point. And so it's just like that. And just by flipping it, what was before the edge of the photograph becomes the center of it.
Bill, what time of day did you take that picture?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that one. It was probably, I'm inclined to say, in the afternoon. But you really can't see much of the sky, and so it's kind of hard to say. All right. So this guy is cute, right? Maybe terminally so. And, you know, it's a good enough picture of the lemur. And you've got his eyes are good and sharp, and the face area is good and sharp, wonderful, and it works as a black and white. But the only reason I put it in was to show this in contrast. Okay, everybody thought the lemur was cute, but I got a lot more reactions in this photo. And people ask me, how do you see these things? And it's like, you train yourself after a while. You just, you know, I'm looking at the lemur, I got the what I call the walk-up picture, right? That's this one. You know, that's the obvious. And then I started looking for what else is there, and I saw that. And finally, new area for me is infrared. I was going to put a few more photos and add some comments, but I haven't been at it long enough to consider myself qualified to talk to anybody. The one or two observations I will make. This photo kind of shows what infrared is strong at, right? If you've ever wanted to shoot the cherry blossoms in Washington and you're willing to do it in black and white, you can just find a tree with small leaves and infrared will light them up for you. The other thing it's really good at is bringing out the contrast in the skies. This is a good example of that. And I've had some pretty good results thus far and got some decent reactions. And the other trick here is I'm trying to approach this and not let it be a gimmick for everything. I want it to work for photos where it really works and makes a difference. Because otherwise, suddenly everything starts to look the same.
Did you do a conversion or is that a filter?
That's actually, I got a camera that has in your cameras there's a filter that blocks out the infrared, and there are companies that will remove it. Well, I got a hold of a camera where that filter had been removed, and I used a deep black and white infrared filter on the lens. You can also have the camera converted for a single filter. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. The other thing I will say is that I've noted that glare and flare can be an issue with infrared, and so for most infrared photos, I'm winding up using the D Haze filter at about between 20 and 40, and that cleans up that issue nicely. And that's about all I'm qualified. At some point, we should have Nancy do a presentation on infrared because she does it frequently and has been at it longer than I am. Okay, so finally, right. Any questions?
Can I borrow your eyeballs?
As I've said before, they're getting older. You might not like it. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you do color pops at times?
Oh yeah, I've shot a lot of color, and you know, I do it well enough. I remember when somebody once said, "Boy, I tend to pump up the color, but not to the point where it's distorted." Somebody said, "When you do color, you really do color." Okay.
No, I'm saying like with the black and white and being able to pop out of if somebody had on a yellow shirt or something.
Oh, okay. Selective color. Once in a while, I don't do a lot of that, but I have done it once in a while for whatever reason. I thought that it made it good for a particular picture. Like I had a shot of a tattoo shop, and in the middle of the whole thing was a red heart. And so I left all that in black and white, and I popped out the red heart in color. It's one example. Anything else? Well, thank you for being patient.